Today we're going to talk about Workbook 5A, Exercise 3. In the textbook, we're looking at pages 11 and 12. The topic today is estimation and approximation. And so we start out with the idea that there are 4,865 people who watched a badminton match. And one person says there were about 4,900 people. Now that's rounding 4,865 to the nearest hundred because we say that is 4,800. It's more than 4,800, so it's between 4,800 and 4,900. And then if we look right in the middle at 4,850, we know that 4,865 is to the right of that. So it's closer to 4,900. Now, I like to think about it by saying this is 4,800 plus 65. If I'm at 4,800 and I go 65 further, I know that I'm closer to 4,900 because halfway there is 50, right? And so if I go 4,800, if I have 4,800 people and I have 65 more, if I'm rounding to the nearest hundred, then I would say 4,865 is approximately 4,900, 4,900. This symbol, the squiggly line equal sign, means it's not equal, it's just approximately. It's similar. It's a rounded answer. But then on the bottom of the page, somebody else talks about the event and says there were about 5,000 people. Well, that person, instead of rounding to the nearest hundred, chose to round to the nearest thousand. If I made a picture of this, I'd say 4,865 is between 4,000 and 5,000. Right smack in the middle is 4,500, and 4,865 is past that, and so we would round it to the closest thousand, which would be 5,000. Now, you can also look at 4,865, and you could say that that is 4,000 plus 865. We know that half of 1,000 is 500, so if you're at 500 or above, you round up to 5,000. And remember, there is a rule about that. 500 is exactly in the middle, so if you're 500, we have to have a rule. You're not nearer either, so you would round up. But in this case, you're all the way to 865. Definitely you would round that up to 5,000. So notice the answer is different based on what you're rounding to. It's necessary to know, how does the book want you to round? How does a question want you to round? If we're doing dollars, maybe you want to round to the nearest hundred so you can pay in $100 bills. There are ways to round and you get a little bit of a different answer. So you have to know which one you're trying to round to. So on page 12, there are actually 3 examples where we're rounding to the nearest 10, to the nearest 100, and then the nearest 1,000. So let's walk through those in practice. 487 to the nearest 10. Again, you can draw every one of these. You could draw and say 480 and 490 are the tens closest to 487. Remember, a nearest 10 will have a 0 at the last digit. So 480, 490 are the ones to consider. It'll be one of those two because 487 is between them. 487 is closer to 490. So when it rounds to the nearest 10, it would round to 490. Again, rather than drawing it, I'm used to thinking 48 tens and 7, and realizing that since I've gone 5 or more, I'm closer to 49 tens. Again, I don't write it every time, I just think about it. So maybe you could pause the recording, write down a quick answer to what these would round to the nearest 10, and then turn it on and see if my answers agree with yours. I like to think of this as 60 tens plus 4, so it would be about the same as 60 tens. This is 79 tens plus 5. That's about the same thing as 80 tens. The last number is 99 tens plus 9, so that's going to be the same, well, not the same, it's going to round to be 100 tens. Now notice I said on part A, I said 60 tens, that's the same thing as 600. 80 tens is the same thing as 800, and 100 tens is of course the same thing as 1,000. The next part of that page asks us to round to the nearest hundred. So let's think about hundreds. This is 5,700 and 14 more. Since a half of 100 is 50, I've not gone more than half yet. I'm still closer to the 5,700 than I am to the 5,800. Again, I'd encourage you to pause the recording, write your answers down, and just check with the ones that I write down and see if you have the same things. This is 3,600 plus 50. Now this is the first time we used it today, but we talked a lot in Primary Math 4 in Workbook 4A about the fact that if you go to 50, you're exactly halfway, and when you're halfway, we just make a rule that you're going to round up to the next 100. So 3,650 is going to round to 3,700. This next one is 6,000 and 47. That's not quite halfway yet, so it's closer to 6,000 or 6,000. 4,995 is going to be closer to 5,000. The last part of page 12 is to round to the nearest 1,000. Remember, 1/2 of 1,000 is 500. So that's our halfway mark. 16,500 is between 16,000 and 17,000. In fact, it's exactly halfway between 16,000 and 17,000. It's not nearer to either. So we have a rule. The rule is round up. So at 16,500, we're going to round up to 17,000. On number 6, again, good time to pause, write down your answers, check and see if you got what I am about to say. 23,490 is closer to 23,000. 54,550 is past the halfway mark. Remember, 500 is halfway, so it's going to be 55,000 when it's rounded. 39,900 is definitely past the halfway, so it'll be 40,000 when you round it to the nearest 1,000. And with that information, you are ready to do exercise 3.